The old man's hands did not shake when he signed the entry form. That was the first thing Specialist Owen Rafferty noticed. Not the age spots. Not the hearing aid tucked behind the left ear. Not the canvas rifle case faded to the colour of old grass that the man had set down on the registration table with the kind of deliberate care most people reserve for sleeping infants. It was the hands, steady as iron pipe. The pen moved across the paper in clean, unhurried lines, and when he finished, he capped the pen and slid the form back across the table without looking up. "Name?" Rafferty said, even though he was looking right at it. "Aldrich," the man said. "Henry Dale Aldrich." He was 79 years old. He had driven 41 miles from a town most people in that county had stopped bothering to find on a map. He had not pre-registered. He had not called ahead. He had simply arrived the way weather arrives and stood in line behind a kid in a Magpul t-shirt who spent 6 minutes arguing about the scoring format. The Tri-County Vintage Rifle Invitational was not a famous competition. It was held every April at the Kessler Creek Shooting Sports Complex outside of Dunmore, Tennessee, on a Saturday when the dogwoods were usually in bloom and the wind came off the ridge in slow, rolling gusts that separated the careful shooters from the lucky ones. Maybe 200 people showed up on a good year. Collectors, hobbyists, a few serious competitors who drove in from Knoxville or Chattanooga. The parking lot filled with pickup trucks. The smell of Hoppy's No. 9 and coffee and early morning dew hung over everything like a shared memory. Henry Dale Aldrich walked through it all like a man who had been somewhere much louder. He found a spot at the end of the staging bench, set his case down and sat beside it. He did not open it yet. He watched the other shooters for a while. The way they handled their rifles, the way they checked their scopes, the way they talked to each other with the easy confidence of men who had never had to be quiet for a long time. He watched all of this without expression, not cold, not unfriendly, simply present the way a stone in a creek is present, letting everything move around it. A man named Boyd Specker, who ran the range officer station and had opinions about nearly everything, noticed the canvas case and drifted over. "Morning," Specker said. "Morning," Aldrich said. "You shoot here before?" "No," Specker nodded at the case. "What have you got in there, if you don't mind my asking?" Aldrich looked at him for a moment. "M1941, he said. Specker waited for more. More didn't come. He cleared his throat. "Johnson? That's right, huh?" Specker glanced around reflexively the way a man does when he wants a witness. There was no one close enough. "Don't see many of those." "No," Aldrich agreed. "You don't." He said it without pride. Just as a fact. The way you would say the sky was blue or the creek was running high. Specker stood there another moment, wanting to ask something else, then decided against it and walked back to his station. The morning light was coming in flat and gold through the pine trees at the east end of the range. Aldrich watched it for a while. Then he unzipped the case. You have to understand what a Johnson M1941 is and what it isn't, before you can understand why everyone in a 50-foot radius quietly stopped what they were doing. It isn't a Garand. People always want to compare it to the Garand. The way people want to compare any good thing to the famous version of that good thing. And the comparison is technically fair in the way that comparing a river to a canal is technically fair. They both carry water, but a Johnson has something the Garand doesn't, something hard to name, a lightness, a mechanical elegance, a sense that whoever designed it was trying to solve a problem rather than win a contract. The rotary magazine sits flush against the receiver and loads through the side gate with stripper clips, 5 rounds at a time, 10 rounds total, and when it's done right, when the follower clicks into place and the bolt rides home on a cartridge, it makes a sound that is precise and final and deep, almost unreasonably satisfying. The Johnson that Henry Dale Aldrich lifted from that canvas case was not a museum piece. It was a shooter's rifle. The stock was walnut, dark with age and use, worn smooth at the grip and the cheek rest in the way that only comes from actual years of actual hands. The metal was parkerized, not polished, that flat matte grey that eats light rather than reflecting it, that says this was built for a purpose, and the purpose was not to impress anyone. There was no rust. There were no pits. There was a small crescent-shaped mark on the left side of the receiver that might have been a repair or might have been something else, and Aldrich's thumb moved across it once, briefly, before he set the rifle on the bench. The kid in the Magpul t-shirt was the first one to say something. "Is that?" He started, then stopped, then started again. "Sir, is that an actual Johnson?" "It is," Aldrich said. "I've never seen one outside of a picture. Most people haven't. By now there were 4 or 5 people standing in a loose half circle, not crowding. The way range people never crowd because range etiquette is a real thing, but standing close enough to see. One of them, an older man with a grey beard and a VFW cap, had set down his own rifle entirely and was leaning forward with his hands on his knees, like a man watching something being born. A woman named Sandra Keach, who competed in the military surplus division and had been doing it for 11 years, crouched down slightly to look at the receiver from the side. "Where did you get it?" she asked. Aldrich looked at her. She was maybe 50, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who asked questions because she actually wanted to know the answers. He seemed to decide something. "It was my father's," he said. His father's name was Corporal Franklin Aldrich, USMC, 1st Marine Raider Battalion. That was a fact Henry Dale Aldrich had lived with his entire life, the way you live with the knowledge of a river near your house. Always there, always present, shaping the landscape around you without ever being something you had to look at directly. His father didn't talk about the war, not once. Not in 71 years of living after it. Not at the dinner table, not in the small hours, not in the hospital at the end. When the morphine had taken down most of the walls, a man builds around certain rooms. Franklin Aldrich had come home from the Pacific in late 1945, married a woman named Edith Louise Coburn, moved to Eastern Tennessee, and become a man who repaired clocks. He was extraordinary at it. He could take a mechanism apart down to its smallest component, lay every piece on a cloth in perfect order, find the one thing that had failed, fix it, and put it all back together so that the clock ran better than it had before. He did this for 40 years in a shop on the main street of a town that no longer exists as it was then. People drove from 3 counties over. He never advertised. The rifle had been in the closet of the back bedroom for as long as Henry could remember. Not hidden, not displayed. Just there in the canvas case on the shelf above the extra blankets. When Henry was 12, he asked about it. His father looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "That goes where I go. When I'm gone, it goes to you. Don't ask me anything else about it." Henry didn't. Not then. Not ever. When Franklin Aldrich died in the spring of 1987, at the age of 68, Henry Dale Aldrich was 43 years old, living in Knoxville, working for a survey company, and not particularly thinking about rifles. He drove home for the funeral. He helped his mother with the arrangements. He sat in the front pew of the First Baptist Church and listened to a preacher talk about a man the preacher had not known very well, which is almost always how it goes. Afterward, his mother handed him the canvas case. "He left a note," she said, "inside the zipper pocket." The note was written in pencil on a piece of paper that had been folded so many times the creases were almost as dark as the writing. Henry unfolded it carefully at the kitchen table while his mother stood at the sink looking out the window. "You'll want to know what it did. I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is what it was. It was the most reliable thing I owned in the worst place I ever was. Take care of it the way it took care of me. Don't let anyone tell you old things don't work. They just need someone to still believe in them." Dad Henry Dale Aldrich sat at that kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the dogwoods were in bloom. He didn't fire it that year. He didn't fire it the year after. He took it out of the case occasionally, the way you take out something precious that you're not entirely sure what to do with. Carefully, in good light, handling it with more ceremony than reason could quite justify. He read about the Johnson rifle. He read about the 1st Marine Raiders. He read about Guadalcanal and New Georgia and Bougainville, places that had been a Pacific hell of jungle and heat, and things he still could not fully imagine despite everything he'd read. He read about a kind of fighting that the Pacific demanded from the men who did it, and he thought about his father's hands, those careful clockmaker's hands, and he tried to hold both of those things in his mind at the same time. He couldn't quite do it. That was okay. He didn't think he was supposed to. He kept the rifle clean. He kept it oiled. He kept it the way his father had apparently kept it for 42 years. Not as a relic, not as a trophy, but as a thing that had earned the right to be maintained. He bought a small stock of 30-06 ammunition and stored it carefully. He bought a cleaning kit and learned the disassembly procedure from a manual he found at an estate sale in Oak Ridge. He was 60 years old the first time he fired it. He'd driven out to a friend's property in Morgan County on a cold November morning, set up a target at 100 yards, and stood there for a long moment, just holding it, feeling the weight of it, before he raised it to his shoulder. The Johnson has a 10-round capacity and a recoil-operated action that cycles smoother than you expect for a rifle of its era. When Aldrich pressed the trigger the first time, he was prepared for a lot of things. For the sound, for the recoil, for the mechanical sensation of a weapon cycling that had not cycled in 6 decades. He was not prepared for how right it felt. He fired all 10 rounds without putting the rifle down. 8 of them hit within a 4-inch group at 100 yards. He stood there afterward in the November quiet, the faint smell of burnt powder drifting back across him, and felt something he did not have an immediate word for. It wasn't pride. It was closer to relief, as though something that had been waiting a very long time had finally been permitted to happen. He reloaded through the side gate, stripper clip by stripper clip, hearing that small, precise click as each round seated, and fired again. He shot it a dozen times over the next 19 years. Never at a competition, never in public, just in fields and on private ranges, always alone or nearly so, always with the same deliberate, unhurried attention to every element. He became a careful shooter, not a spectacular one. Careful. The kind of careful that comes from understanding that the rifle in your hands belonged to someone who needed it to work the first time, every time, in conditions that would have made lesser men put it down. His wife, Loretta, had asked him once why he never entered any competitions. "Because it's not mine to show off," he'd said. She had thought about this for a while. She was a patient woman, Loretta, the kind of patience that is not passive but active. A continuous, deliberate choosing to give the people she loved the room they needed. She'd been married to Henry Dale Aldrich for 47 years, and she knew which rooms were his and which ones she was welcome in. "Do you think your father would have wanted you to just keep it in a closet?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "He wanted me to believe in it," he said finally. "I'm still working on what that means." Loretta had died 3 years ago. He had kept the rifle. He was not entirely sure what that meant either. The first relay of the morning competition started at 9 o'clock. Henry Dale Aldrich had drawn lane 7. He carried the cased rifle to the bench, set it down, and began his preparation with the same economy of motion he brought to everything. No wasted movement, no performance, just the quiet sequencing of a man who has done something enough times to have stopped thinking about the individual steps. The shooter in lane 6 was a young man, mid-20s, with a scoped Mosin Nagant and a confidence that sat on him like a new coat, slightly too large, the shoulders not quite right. He'd been talking loudly to a friend behind the line about trajectory and bullet drop and something he'd read on a forum, and he'd glanced over at Aldrich a few times, with a particular expression. Young men sometimes wear around old men at shooting ranges, the expression that is not quite dismissal and not quite pity, but lives somewhere uncomfortable in between. His name, Aldrich would later learn, was Tyler Voss. Voss watched Aldrich uncase the Johnson. His commentary stopped mid-sentence. "What?" he said. Not a question, just the word alone. The man on the other side of Aldrich, a solidly built man in his 50s named Roger Chamberlain, who shot a Springfielder .3 with a steadiness that came from deep habit, leaned over slightly and said quietly, "Son, what you're looking at is a Johnson M1941. USMC issued. I'd estimate 1942 production, maybe early 43. He paused. "I'd also estimate you're about to have a very educational morning." Voss looked at Chamberlain, then back at the rifle, then at Aldrich. Is it functional?" he asked. Aldrich looked up from where he was loading the first stripper clip through the side gate. "Why don't you watch and find out?" he said. There was no edge in it. He wasn't performing for anyone. He just turned back to the rifle and continued loading, the 2 5-round clips stripping down, clean and easy. The follower seating with that small metallic click that Chamberlain later described to 3 different people as the most satisfying mechanical sound he'd heard in 20 years on this range. The range officer called the line hot. Aldrich shouldered the rifle. Here is what happened, and what did not happen, in the 3 minutes and 40 seconds of that first relay. What did not happen? A miracle. Aldrich was not some restored marksman from another era. He was a 79-year-old man with ordinary eyes, a repaired left shoulder from a fall 8 years ago, and a rifle that had last been fired in the Pacific Theatre by someone who was not him. What happened? Everything his father had written in that pencil note turned out to be exactly true. The Johnson M1941, maintained with care for 80-plus years, functioned with an authority that had nothing to prove. The action cycled clean and smooth, each round chambering with the kind of mechanical confidence that the best-made things wear without effort. At 100 yards, on a standard target, in a 12-mile-per-hour crosswind off the ridge, Henry Dale Aldrich fired 10 rounds in measured sequence, working the trigger with the careful patience of a man who understood that the rifle would do its part if he did his. When the range officer called ceasefire and the shooters sent their targets down, Aldrich's was the last one anyone looked at, because no one had been watching his lane with any real attention, and then it was the first one anyone looked at, for the same reason. 7 rounds inside for 4 inches, 2 more at the edge. One that caught the wind wrong and opened the group up, which Aldrich noted without distress because the wind had caught it wrong and that was a fact, not an excuse. Tyler Voss stared at the target for a long time. "That rifle is 80 years old," he finally said. 83, Aldrich said. "Approximately. How?" Voss stopped. "How does it still shoot like that?" Aldrich broke the rifle open, checked the chamber, cleared it, and set it on the bench with the action open the way safe rifles are set on benches. "Because someone took care of it," he said. He said it simply, not as a lesson, not as a rebuke, just as the answer to the question that had been asked. Voss nodded slowly. He had the look of a young man who was in the process of revising something. "Was it yours?" he asked. "I mean, originally?" "No," Aldrich said. "Then whose?" "My father's." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Then was he a shooter? Like a competitive shooter?" Aldrich looked at the rifle. At the parkerized metal, at the worn walnut stock, at the small crescent mark on the receiver that he had touched 1,000 times and would never know the full story of, because that story had gone with Franklin Aldrich to a cemetery in eastern Tennessee in the spring of 1987. He was a Marine, Aldrich said. Pacific Theater. 1st Raider Battalion. The silence that came after that was a different kind of silence than the range usually produced. Roger Chamberlain, who had been listening while pretending not to, removed his cap. Word moved through the range the way word moves through any small community of people who care about specific things, in murmurs and elbowed ribs and nodded gestures toward Lane 7. By the second relay, there were people standing along the back of the line who were ostensibly waiting for the next rotation but were not really waiting for that at all. Sandra Ketch had not left the staging area. She came over between relays and asked if she could look at the rifle, and Aldrich said yes, and she handled it with the careful reverence of someone who understood what they were holding. She looked at the side-loading gate. She worked the action gently, without a round chambered. She looked at the crescent mark. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, pointing to it. "I have theories," Aldrich said. "What's your best one?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think it's a repair. I think something happened to the receiver in the field, and someone fixed it well enough to keep the rifle in service." Sandra looked at it for another moment. "In the field? In the Pacific?" "That's my best theory," Aldrich said. She handed it back. "Your father never told you," she said. "It wasn't a question." "My father never told me anything about it," Aldrich said. "He left a note when he died." "What did the note say?" Aldrich told her. He told her exactly what the note said, the way you tell certain things to certain people when the time for keeping them private has passed. Not as a performance, but because the words deserve to be heard out loud by someone who is capable of hearing them properly. When he finished, Sandra Keach did not say anything for a moment. "Don't let anyone tell you old things don't work," she said quietly. "They just need someone to still believe in them." "Yes," Aldrich said. "He knew you'd bring it here someday." Aldrich looked at her. "I don't know that," he said. "I do," she said. He didn't argue with her. The afternoon relay was the long-distance event, 200 yards, open sights, which eliminated most of the scoped modern rifles from serious contention and brought the vintage iron sight shooters to the front of the conversation. There were 11 entries. Most of them shot Garans. 2 shot 1903 Springfields. One man, from up near Cookville, shot a Winchester Model 70 in .30-06 that he claimed had belonged to his uncle and that no one entirely believed him about. But the rifle shot well enough that the question became somewhat academic, and Henry Dale Aldrich shot a Johnson M1941. He did not win. He placed 3rd, with a score that would have been unremarkable from a shooter 30 years his junior at half the distance. At 200 yards, with open sights, at 79 years old, shooting a rifle that had last seen serious use before most of the people on that range had been born. It was a score that several of the other competitors quietly recalculated in their heads and then recalculated again, because the first result seemed improbable. The man who won was Roger Chamberlain, who deserved it, and who was genuinely and entirely pleased about it right up until the moment he looked at the overall results and said, to no one in particular, Third place isn't the story here, Boyd Specker agreed. Tyler Voss, who had finished sixth, agreed emphatically. What Aldrich felt, standing at the results board with his reading glasses on, looking at the numbers, is difficult to know for certain. He was not a man who narrated his internal life, not to strangers, not to acquaintances, not even, in most cases, to himself. But there was a moment, brief and private, when his right hand moved to the canvas rifle case beside him, rested there for just a second, and then moved away. If you had been watching closely, you might have noticed it. If you had been watching closely, you might have thought he looked like a man acknowledging a debt. After the scores were posted and the crowd began to thin, Aldrich carried his rifle back to the staging area and began breaking it down for the case. He worked methodically, as always. The action, the barrel, the stock. His hands moved over each piece with the attentiveness of long practice, not hurried, not slow, each component receiving its moment of attention before being placed back in its correct position. Tyler Voss appeared beside him. He was not the loud young man from the morning. He stood quietly for a moment, watching Aldrich work, and then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," Aldrich said. "How did you learn to shoot it? Who taught you?" Aldrich looked at him. The young man was serious. This was a real question. "Nobody," Aldrich said. "I figured it out from the manual." "And from shooting it, just by yourself?" "Mostly." Voss thought about this. "Your dad didn't teach you?" "My dad didn't talk about it," Aldrich said. He said it without bitterness, without sadness, without anything that might lead someone to feel sorry for him. "He left me the rifle, and he left me a note, and he left me the responsibility of figuring the rest out. That's—" Voss paused. "That's a lot to put on a person." "It's what fathers do," Aldrich said. "The ones who can't find the words." Voss was quiet for a long moment. "I never knew my grandfather," he said finally. "He served in Vietnam. He died before I was born." He looked at the cased rifle. "I don't have anything that was his." Aldrich looked at him. "Then find something that connects you to what he was," he said. "It doesn't have to be a rifle. It just has to be something you'll take care of." He closed the case and zipped it shut, slowly, with the same deliberate care he'd used when he set it on the registration table that morning. "The taking care of it," he said, "is the point." He drove home in the late afternoon, the canvas case on the back seat, the windows down a little, to let in the smell of the Tennessee spring, cut grass and creek water, and something floral that might have been wild honeysuckle on the ridge above the highway. He did not stop for dinner. He was not hungry. When he got home, he set the case on the kitchen table and made himself a cup of coffee and stood at the counter drinking it, looking out the window at the backyard where Loretta's rose bushes were coming in, slightly wild now after 3 years without her particular attention, but alive. He took the rifle out one more time. Not to clean it. He'd cleaned it at the range before driving home. Just to hold it for a moment in the kitchen light. He thought about Franklin Aldrich, who had repaired clocks for 40 years and never said one word about what he'd done before that. He thought about a jungle somewhere in the Pacific, a name on a map that meant nothing to most people, and a young Marine who had kept his rifle functioning in conditions that were not supposed to allow for functioning rifles. He thought about a note, written in pencil, folded so many times the creases had gone dark. He thought about what it meant to believe in something old. Outside, in the last light of the afternoon, a mockingbird was going through its repertoire in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Cardinal, wren, jay, something else he couldn't identify, cycling through every voice it knew, patient and methodical, as though it had all the time in the world to find the right one. Aldrich set the rifle back in the case. He zipped it shut. He finished his coffee. If you have someone in your life who served, who carried something heavy, and came home and never said a word about it, type the word honor in the comments below. They deserve to be remembered.